Desert Night Shadow. Josie Hollis had always been the dutiful daughter, marrying for business instead of love. But before she could say her vows, Rhett Callahan stormed into the church, his revolver gleaming. He caught her hand, his grip firm and sure. "You were never meant for him, Josie," he murmured. "And I'll be damned if I let you go now." Chapter 1. A Gilded Cage of Duty. The scent of lilies and beeswax hung heavy in the air, a suffocating perfume that mirrored the constriction in Josie Hollis's chest. St. Michael's, normally a sanctuary of cool stone and hushed reverence, felt like a gilded cage. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the polished pews in hues of ruby and sapphire, yet Josie felt none of their warmth. Her reflection in the small, oval mirror before her was a stranger, a porcelain doll draped in ivory lace and silk. The dress, a masterpiece crafted by Madame Evangeline herself, was meant to symbolize purity and new beginnings, but to Josie, it felt like a shroud. Her fingers, adorned with rings she hadn't chosen, traced the delicate embroidery. Each stitch was a reminder of the life she was about to enter, a life meticulously planned, devoid of passion, but overflowing with obligation. Her marriage to Benjamin Carter was a merger, a strategic alliance between two of the most powerful ranching families in the territory. It was what her father, Silas Hollis, had always wanted. A union that would solidify their legacy, expand their holdings, and secure their future. Love, in Silas Hollis's world, was a frivolous indulgence, a weakness best avoided. Josie glanced at her father, standing stiff and proud by the window. His silver hair gleamed under the colored light, his weathered face set in a mask of satisfaction. He was a man carved from the very landscape he dominated, his eyes the color of the flint he used to spark fires, his hands calloused from years of wrangling cattle and men. He'd built his empire from nothing, clawing his way to the top with a ruthless determination that brooked no argument. Josie, his only surviving child, was the final piece in his grand design. A pang of guilt twisted in her stomach. She knew she should be grateful. Many women would envy her position, marrying into wealth and security. But Josie craved something more, something wilder, something real. She yearned for a love that burned like the desert sun, a connection that ran deeper than bloodlines and bank accounts. A foolish dream, she knew, especially for a woman of her standing. Her gaze drifted to the window, beyond the manicured lawns of the Carter estate, to the vast, untamed expanse of the horizon. Rolling hills, dotted with scrub brush and cacti, stretched as far as the eye could see, a landscape that whispered of freedom and danger in equal measure. It was a world away from the stifled formality of the church, a world where a woman could breathe, could choose her own destiny. A soft knock on the door startled her. Her maid, Sarah, a plump woman with a kind face and worried eyes, entered. "It's time, Miss Josie," she said softly, her voice tinged with a sadness that mirrored Josie's own. Josie nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, to force a smile onto her lips. But the smile felt brittle, fragile, like a thin layer of ice over a turbulent river. As she walked towards the door, she caught a glimpse of her reflection again. This time, she saw not a stranger, but a ghost, a woman fading away before she even had a chance to truly live. The organ music swelled, a grand, majestic sound that seemed to mock her inner turmoil. The heavy oak doors of the church swung open, revealing a sea of faces, all turned towards her, expectant and curious. Benjamin Carter stood at the altar, his face smug and self-assured, his eyes holding none of the warmth she desperately craved. He was a handsome man, in a polished, predictable way, but his presence did nothing to quell the growing unease in her heart. She started down the aisle, her steps measured and slow, each one a step further into a life she didn't want. The scent of lilies intensified, becoming almost unbearable. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she felt like she was going to faint. She gripped her bouquet tighter, the thorns of the roses digging into her palm, a small, sharp pain that grounded her. Then it happened. A sudden commotion erupted at the back of the church. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a collective murmur of shock and disbelief. Josie's heart leaped into her throat, a flicker of something akin to hope, desperate and wild, igniting within her. She turned, her gaze drawn to the source of the disruption. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight, was a figure that seemed to have stepped straight out of one of the dime novels she secretly devoured. Tall and lean, with a shock of dark hair that fell across his forehead, he exuded an aura of raw power and untamed energy. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, scanned the room, finally settling on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore the clothes of an outlaw, a worn leather vest, dusty chaps, and a gun belt slung low on his hips, the revolver gleaming ominously in the sudden silence. It was Rhett Callahan, the man her father had warned her about, the man who was everything Benjamin Carter was not. Dangerous, unpredictable, and undeniably captivating. A man who lived by his own rules, a man who defied convention, a man who had haunted her dreams since she was a girl. A man whispered to be involved in things no proper lady should ever know. He strode towards her, his boots echoing on the stone floor, each step deliberate and confident. The crowd parted before him, a sea of stunned faces, their whispers silenced by the sheer audacity of his presence. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze never leaving hers. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked like regret, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce determination that sent a shiver down her spine. He caught her hand, his grip firm and sure, surprisingly gentle despite his rough appearance. His touch was like a spark, igniting a fire that had long been dormant within her. Time seemed to stand still, the world outside them fading away, leaving only the two of them, locked in a silent battle of wills and unspoken desires. The lily scent was suddenly replaced by something earthier, leather, gunpowder, and a hint of the wild desert wind. "You were never meant for him, Josie," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant drawl that sent tremors through her very core. "And I'll be damned if I let you go now." His words, though quiet, seemed to reverberate through the silent church, challenging the very foundations of her carefully constructed world. The look in his stormy eyes dared her to defy him, dared her to choose a different path, a path fraught with danger, but also with the promise of something real. Something she had secretly yearned for so long. The silence held, thick with the weight of unspoken words and the looming threat of violence, a precipice upon which her entire future balanced, teetering on the edge of a blade forged in the heart of the wild, untamed frontier. Chapter 2. The Outlaw's Claim. Chaos erupted. Silas Hollis, his face contorted in a mask of fury, roared, "Callahan, you dare interrupt my daughter's wedding?" His hand instinctively went to the pistol he always kept holstered, a habit ingrained from years of defending his land and his interests. The wedding guests scattered, their finery rustling like startled birds, the women shrieking, the men reaching for their own weapons, a tableau of civilized decorum dissolving into primal fear. Benjamin Carter, his face pale with a mixture of shock and humiliation, stammered, "Josie, what is the meaning of this?" His voice, usually so commanding, was barely a whisper, lost in the rising din. He looked from Josie to Rhett, his eyes filled with a dawning horror, the carefully constructed facade of his composure crumbling. Josie, however, felt a strange sense of calm amidst the storm. Rhett's hand, still holding hers, was a steady anchor in the swirling vortex of confusion. She looked at Benjamin, at his bewildered, almost pathetic expression, and felt a pang of pity, but nothing more. The gilded cage had been shattered, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free, even if that freedom was terrifying. Rhett's eyes, however, never left Silas. "This ain't about you, Hollis," he said, his voice low and dangerous, a rumble of thunder before the storm. "It's about Josie. And she's coming with me." Silas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you can just waltz in here and steal my daughter? You're a dead man, Callahan." Rhett's grip on Josie's hand tightened, but his gaze remained locked on Silas. "I ain't stealing anything that wasn't already stolen from me," he said, his voice laced with a pain that surprised Josie. She looked at him, questioning, but his expression was unreadable, a mask of carefully controlled fury.
"What are you talking about?"
Silas sneered. "You've got nothing. You're nothing but a common outlaw, a thief. A man who loved her before she was promised to another." Rhett cut him off, his voice rising slightly. "A man who held her in his arms and swore to protect her, long before you decided to sell her off like a prize heifer." Josie gasped. The words, spoken with such raw emotion, struck her like a physical blow. She had known Rhett, yes, but their encounters had been fleeting, stolen moments in the shadows, whispers in the moonlight. She had never dared to hope, never dared to believe that his feelings ran as deep as her own. Silas scoffed. "Romantic drivel. You think a few stolen kisses outweigh a lifetime of security? Josie is a Hollis. She belongs with her own kind." "Her kind?" Rhett's voice dripped with scorn. "You mean the kind that values money over happiness? The kind that treats women like possessions?" He turned to Josie, his eyes softening, a flicker of vulnerability replacing the hard mask. "Josie, look at me." She did, her heart pounding in her chest. His eyes were a maelstrom of emotions, a mixture of anger, pain, and something that looked undeniably like love. She saw a depth in him she hadn't seen before, a raw honesty that stripped away the carefully constructed facade of the outlaw. "Do you want this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, gesturing towards the altar, towards Benjamin, towards the life that had been laid out for her. "Do you want to spend the rest of your days with a man who sees you as nothing more than a stepping stone to power?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Josie looked at Benjamin, his face still a mask of bewildered hurt, his eyes pleading. She looked at her father, his face a thundercloud of rage, his hand still hovering over his gun. And then she looked back at Rhett, at the man who had risked everything to come for her, the man who saw her, truly saw her, for who she was, not what she represented. The answer was clear as the vast, open sky above them. "No," she said, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with each word. "No, I don't." A collective gasp went through the church. Silas's face turned a shade of purple that was almost comical. Benjamin looked like he had been struck by lightning. Rhett's grip on her hand tightened, a silent promise of protection. He turned back to Silas, his eyes blazing with defiance. "She's made her choice, Hollis. Now back off." Silas, however, was not a man to be deterred. He drew his gun, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. "You'll have to kill me first, Callahan." Rhett didn't flinch. He slowly drew his own revolver, the movement smooth and practiced, a deadly grace that spoke of years spent living on the edge. The two men faced each other, a tableau of Old West justice, the air thick with tension, the scent of gunpowder mingling with the lingering fragrance of lilies. The fate of Josie, and perhaps their own lives, hung in the balance, suspended between a father's possessive rage and an outlaw's desperate claim. The church, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground, the sacred space now echoing with the whispers of a forbidden love and the imminent threat of bloodshed. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. Before either man could fire, Josie stepped between them, her hands raised in a plea for peace.
"No,"
she cried, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent church. "There's been enough bloodshed. Father, please put the gun down." Silas hesitated, his eyes flickering between Josie and Rhett. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but there was also something else, a flicker of doubt? Perhaps even a hint of respect for Rhett's audacity, for his willingness to defy him. "Josie, this is madness," Silas said, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what you're doing. This man is a criminal, an outlaw. He'll ruin you." "He's the only one who's ever seen me, Father," Josie replied, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "The only one who's ever cared about what I want, not what you want for me." Her words struck a chord. Silas lowered his gun slightly, his expression softening, if only for a moment. He looked at Josie, really looked at her, and for the first time, he seemed to see not just a pawn in his game, but his daughter, a woman with her own desires, her own dreams. Rhett, sensing the shift in Silas's demeanor, lowered his own gun as well, but his eyes remained wary, his body tense, ready to react if necessary. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of the three of them. "This isn't over, Callahan," Silas said, his voice low and threatening. "I won't let you take her. She's a Hollis. She belongs here. She belongs where she chooses to be," Rhett replied, his voice equally firm. "And she's chosen to be with me." He looked at Josie, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "Are you sure about this, Josie? There's no turning back. My life, it ain't easy. It's dangerous. There's no guarantee of anything." Josie met his gaze, her heart swelling with a love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had never felt so alive, so certain of anything in her life. "I'm sure," she said, her voice clear and strong. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent vow of commitment. With a final, lingering look at her father, a look filled with a mixture of sadness and defiance, Josie turned and walked with Rhett out of the church, leaving behind the shattered remnants of her old life. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence, their whispers following them like shadows. Benjamin Carter stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. As they stepped out into the bright sunlight, Josie felt a sense of liberation she had never experienced before. The vast, open sky seemed to stretch on forever, a promise of endless possibilities. But she also knew that they were stepping into a world of uncertainty, a world where danger lurked around every corner. Rhett led her to a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming in the sun. He helped her mount, his touch gentle and protective, then swung up behind her, his arms encircling her waist. The horse, sensing their urgency, took off at a gallop, carrying them away from the Carter estate, away from the stifling constraints of her former life, towards an unknown future. As they rode, Josie leaned back against Rhett, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She felt safe, protected, but also a little scared. She had so many questions, so much she didn't know about him, about his past, about the life he led. "Rhett," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "What did you mean back there? About loving me before?" He was silent for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic pounding of the horse's hooves. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough, filled with a pain that resonated deep within her. "It was a long time ago, Josie," he said. "Before your father, before he made his fortune. We were just kids, really. We used to meet down by the creek, hidden away from the world. We shared secrets, dreams, we fell in love." Josie listened, her heart aching with a bittersweet longing. She remembered those days, the stolen moments of joy, the innocent promises whispered under the vast, starlit sky. She had thought it was just a childish infatuation, a fleeting fancy. But now, hearing him speak, she realized it had been something more, something real, something that had been brutally ripped away from them. "Your father," he found out, Rhett continued, his voice tight with anger. "He forbade me from seeing you. He said I wasn't good enough, that I was a nobody, a dirt-poor ranch hand with no future. He threatened to ruin my family if I didn't stay away." Josie felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had known her father was a hard man, but she had never realized the extent of his cruelty. She had always believed he had her best interests at heart, but now she saw that he had been motivated by his own ambition, his own desire for power and control. "I had no choice, Josie," Rhett said, his voice filled with regret. "I had to leave. I had to protect my family. But I never forgot you. I never stopped loving you." The wind whipped around them, carrying away his words, carrying away the years of pain and separation. Josie closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. The shadows of the past were beginning to lift, revealing a truth that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She had been stolen long before Rhett had stormed into the church. Stolen by her father's ambition, stolen by the expectations of society. But now, she was finally free. Free to choose her own destiny, free to love the man she had always loved, even if that love was forbidden, even if it was dangerous. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, but as long as she was with Rhett, she knew she could face anything. The outlaw had claimed her, but in doing so, he had also given her back to herself. The vast, unforgiving landscape stretched before them, a canvas upon which their new life would be painted, stroke by stroke, with the colors of courage, defiance, and a love that had endured the darkest of shadows. Chapter 4. Whispers on the Wind. The wind carried more than just the dust and the scent of sagebrush. It carried whispers. Whispers of Rhett Callahan's daring act, of Josie Hollis's scandalous choice. The news spread like wildfire across the territory, igniting gossip in saloons, sparking hushed conversations in parlors, and fueling the righteous indignation of the respectable folk. Josie, once the epitome of social grace and decorum, was now branded an outcast, a woman who had traded a life of privilege for the uncertain embrace of an outlaw. They rode for hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Carter estate. The landscape changed from rolling hills to rugged canyons, the sun beating down relentlessly. Josie, accustomed to the comforts of her former life, felt the strain of the journey, but she didn't complain. She was determined to prove to Rhett and to herself that she was strong enough, resilient enough, to handle whatever this new life threw at her. Rhett, ever watchful, sensed her fatigue. He slowed the horse to a walk, his hand resting protectively on her back. "We'll stop soon, Josie," he said, his voice gentle. "There's a hidden spring a few miles ahead. We can rest there for the night." Josie nodded, grateful for his consideration. She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his presence. She still felt a tremor of fear, a sense of vulnerability, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of excitement, of anticipation. She was embarking on an adventure, a journey into the unknown, and she was doing it with the man she loved. As they rode, she couldn't help but steal glances at him. His profile was rugged and handsome, etched with the lines of a life lived on the edge. His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with a tenderness that belied his outlaw reputation. She wondered about his past, about the events that had shaped him into the man he was. She wanted to know everything about him, the good and the bad, the secrets he held close. "Rhett," she said, her voice hesitant. "What will we do? Where will we go?" He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We'll head west," he said finally, "towards the mountains. There's a place I know, a hidden valley, where we can be safe.
For a while, at least."
"Safe from whom?" Josie asked, a shiver of apprehension running down her spine. "From your father, for one," Rhett replied, his voice grim. "He won't give up easily. He'll send men after us, bounty hunters, maybe even the law." Josie felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She had underestimated the lengths her father would go to. He was a powerful man, with connections and resources that stretched far and wide. "And from others," Rhett continued, his voice low and ominous. "There are people I've crossed, people who wouldn't hesitate to use you to get to me." Josie looked at him, her eyes wide with alarm. "Who? What people?" Rhett hesitated, his expression troubled. "It's a long story, Josie. A complicated one. And it's not something I want to burden you with right now." Josie sensed his reluctance, his desire to protect her from the harsh realities of his world. But she also knew that she couldn't be kept in the dark forever. She was his partner now, his equal, and she needed to know the dangers they faced. "I can handle it, Rhett," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not a child anymore. I need to know what we're up against." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, assessing her strength, her determination. He saw a woman who was not afraid, a woman who was willing to stand by his side, no matter the cost. "All right," he said, his voice resigned. "But it ain't pretty. There's a man named Silas Thorne. He's a rival of mine. We have a history, a bad one. He's ruthless, Josie, and he's got a long reach. He's been after me for years, and now that you're with me, you're a target too." The name Silas Thorne sent a chill down Josie's spine. She had heard whispers of him, rumors of his cruelty, his ruthlessness. He was a legend in the territory, a man feared by even the most hardened outlaws. "What would happen between you?" Josie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Rhett's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with anger and pain. "It's a long story," he repeated, his voice tight with emotion. "But it involves betrayal, stolen land, and a woman." Josie felt a pang of jealousy, a sharp, unexpected sting. She knew that Rhett had a past, that he had loved before, but it was different hearing it from him, knowing that another woman had once held his heart. "Her name was Sarah," he said, answering her unasked question. A ghost of pain, long buried, flickered behind his eyes. "She was everything to me." Josie looked down and saw his hand fisted so tightly his knuckles were white. The setting sun was casting long, distorted shadows all around them, and suddenly, she understood. Rhett Callahan wasn't just running from her father or a rival outlaw. He was running from a past that clung to him like the desert dust, a past filled with love and loss, a past that threatened to engulf them both. The whispers on the wind were not just about their scandalous escape, they were echoes of a deeper, darker story, a story that was just beginning to unfold. Chapter 5. The Price of Freedom. The hidden spring was a small oasis in the harsh landscape, a sliver of green tucked away in a rocky crevice. The water, cool and clear, gurgled from a fissure in the rock, forming a small pool surrounded by lush vegetation. It was a place of refuge, a sanctuary from the relentless sun and the ever-present danger. Rhett helped Josie dismount, his hands lingering on her waist for a moment longer than necessary. She looked up at him, her eyes questioning, and he offered her a small, almost shy smile, a rare glimpse of vulnerability that melted her heart. "We'll be safe here for tonight," he said, his voice soft. "We can rest, replenish our supplies, and plan our next move." Josie nodded, grateful for the respite. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and the thought of a few hours of peace was a welcome relief. They unsaddled the horse, letting it graze on the sparse grass around the spring. Rhett built a small fire, the flames flickering in the gathering darkness, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding rocks. The air was cool and crisp, a welcome change from the stifling heat of the day. Josie sat by the fire, watching Rhett as he moved with a quiet efficiency, gathering wood, preparing their meager meal. He was a man of action, comfortable in the wilderness, a stark contrast to the pampered men she had known in her former life. As they ate, the silence between them was comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. They were two souls, thrown together by fate, bound by a love that had defied all odds. But Josie knew that this was just the beginning, that the road ahead would be long and difficult. "Rhett," she said, breaking the silence. "Tell me more about Sarah. About what happened." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to go bone deep. He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and began to speak. "She was the daughter of a small rancher, just like your father used to be, before he acquired his wealth," he said with a hint of bitterness. "We met when we were young, and we fell in love. It was a simple, innocent love, but it was everything to us." Josie listened, her heart aching for the young Rhett, for the love he had lost. She could imagine them, two young lovers, dreaming of a future together, a future that had been cruelly snatched away. "Silas Thorne wanted her land," Rhett continued, his voice tight with anger. "He offered to buy it, but her father refused. He said it was their family legacy, that he would never sell." Josie knew where this was going. She had heard stories of Silas Thorne's methods, his ruthless ambition, his willingness to do anything to get what he wanted. "Thorne didn't take no for an answer," Rhett said, his voice shaking with emotion. He framed her father for cattle rustling. He had him arrested, thrown in jail. And then he offered Sarah a deal. He said he would release her father if she agreed to marry him. Josie gasped, horrified. She couldn't imagine the pain, the desperation Sarah must have felt. She had no choice, Rhett said, his voice barely a whisper. She loved her father. She would do anything to save him. She agreed to Thorne's terms. And what happened? Josie asked, her voice trembling. Rhett looked away, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. Her father was released, but he was a broken man. He died a few weeks later, of a broken heart, they said. And Sarah, she was trapped. She was Thorne's wife, his property. Josie felt tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to reach out to Rhett, to comfort him, but she didn't know how. The pain he carried was too deep, too raw. I tried to see her, Rhett continued, his voice hoarse. I tried to convince her to run away with me, but she was afraid. She said Thorne would kill us both. And then one day she was gone. Thorne said she ran off, that she couldn't handle the life. But I knew better. I knew he had done something to her. I couldn't prove it. He fell silent, his body shaking with suppressed rage and grief. Josie finally reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. His hand was cold, trembling, but he gripped hers tightly, as if holding on for dear life. I'm so sorry, Rhett, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I had no idea. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain. It was a long time ago, Josie, he said. But it had changed me. It made me who I am. I vowed I would never let anyone hurt me like that again. I vowed I would get revenge on Thorne.
Josie understood now.
His outlaw life, his ruthlessness, his defiance, it was all a shield, a way to protect himself from the pain, from the vulnerability of love. But she also saw that beneath the hard exterior, there was a heart that still yearned for connection, for love, for redemption. The price of freedom, she realized, was high. It was paid in blood, in tears, in the loss of innocence. But it was also a chance to forge a new path, to create a new life, to find a love that could heal the wounds of the past. As the fire crackled and the stars emerged in the vast, inky sky, she knew that she was ready to pay that price, whatever it may be, as long as she was by Rhett's side. Their journey had just begun, and the shadows of the past were still looming, but in the shared silence, in the warmth of their joined hands, there was a flicker of hope, a fragile promise of a future where love, not vengeance, would light their way. Chapter 6. A Dance with Danger. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the air still holding the chill of the night. The rising sun painted the canyon walls in hues of gold and orange, a breathtaking spectacle that momentarily eased the weight of their predicament. But the beauty was fleeting, a reminder of the harsh reality that awaited them. Rhett was already up, tending to the horse, his movements efficient and practiced. He glanced at Josie as she emerged from their makeshift camp, a small smile playing on his lips. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice gentle. Josie nodded, stretching her stiff muscles. "As well as I could, considering," she replied, a hint of a smile touching her own lips. She was surprised by how quickly she was adapting to this rough life, how readily she was accepting the discomfort and the uncertainty. They ate a quick breakfast of dried meat and biscuits, their conversation minimal, their thoughts focused on the journey ahead. They knew they couldn't stay at the spring for long. Silas Hollis's men and Silas Thorne's would be searching for them, and the longer they remained in one place, the greater the risk of discovery. As they packed their meager belongings, Rhett turned to Josie, his expression serious. "We need to reach Silver Creek by nightfall," he said. "It's a small mining town, nestled in the mountains. We can blend in there, at least for a while. And I have a contact there who might be able to help us." Josie nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Silver Creek. She had heard of it, a rough and tumble town known for its lawlessness, its saloons, and its hidden secrets. It was a dangerous place, but it was also a place where they might find refuge, a place where they could disappear, at least temporarily. They rode for hours, the landscape growing increasingly rugged, the trail winding through narrow canyons and across rocky terrain. Josie, despite her growing confidence, found herself constantly scanning the horizon, her senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, every sound a warning. Rhett, ever vigilant, rode close beside her, his hand never far from his revolver. He was a skilled horseman, his body moving in perfect rhythm with the animal, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. He was her protector, her guide, her anchor in this turbulent world. As they neared Silver Creek, they heard the sounds of the town, a cacophony of noise that carried on the wind, the clatter of horses' hooves, the raucous laughter from saloons, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It was a symphony of chaos, a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of the wilderness. They entered the town cautiously, keeping to the outskirts, avoiding the main street. The buildings were a mix of ramshackle shacks and more substantial structures, all weathered and worn, bearing the marks of time and hardship. The streets were dusty and crowded, filled with miners, cowboys, gamblers, and women of questionable repute. It was a place where anything could happen, where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. Rhett led Josie to a small, unassuming saloon on the edge of town. "The Rusty Spur," he said, nodding towards the weathered sign above the door. "Stay close to me, Josie. And don't talk to anyone." Josie nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a wave of unease wash over her. This was a world she didn't understand, a world of hidden dangers and unspoken rules. They entered the saloon, the air thick with smoke, the smell of whiskey and sweat overpowering. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a few flickering oil lamps and the glow of the fireplace. A piano player in the corner was banging out a lively tune, his music barely audible above the din of conversation and laughter. Rhett guided Josie to a small table in the back, away from the prying eyes of the other patrons. He ordered them drinks, his voice low and cautious. As they waited, Josie couldn't help but observe the other occupants of the saloon. They were a rough-looking lot, their faces etched with the lines of hard living, their eyes wary and suspicious. She felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. This was Rhett's world, the world he had inhabited for years, and she was a stranger here, an outsider. A woman approached their table, her movements fluid and graceful, her eyes bold and assessing. She was strikingly beautiful, with long, dark hair and a dress that revealed more than it concealed. She looked at Rhett, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Rhett Callahan," she said, her voice husky and seductive. "Long time no see." Rhett nodded, his expression guarded. "Maria," he said, his voice noncommittal. Maria's gaze shifted to Josie, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And who is this?" she asked, a hint of jealousy in her voice. "This is Josie," Rhett replied, his hand resting protectively on Josie's arm. "She's with me." Maria raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "I see," she said, her voice dripping with innuendo. Well, Rhett. You always did have a taste for quality." A silent tension had fallen between the three. Josie could feel the past, like a thick smoke, and the unspoken words hanging in the air spoke volumes. Maria, with a final, lingering look at Rhett, turned and walked away, her hips swaying provocatively. Josie was about to speak when she caught the edge of a whisper. "Thorne's men." Just before Maria disappeared into the crowd. The dance had begun, a delicate and dangerous waltz between past and present, love and betrayal, and the price of freedom, it seemed, was to be paid in the currency of constant vigilance. Chapter 7. Scars of Yesterday. The whispered words, "Thorne's men," hung in the air like a venomous cloud, poisoning the already tense atmosphere. Josie's heart leaped into her throat, her hand instinctively reaching for Rhett's. He squeezed it reassuringly, his eyes scanning the saloon, his body tense and alert. "We need to leave," he said, his voice low and urgent.
"Now."
He stood up, pulling Josie with him. They moved quickly towards the back exit, avoiding the crowded bar area. As they reached the door, a man stepped in front of them, blocking their path. He was tall and burly, with a scarred face and cold, menacing eyes. "Going somewhere, Callahan?" He sneered, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. Rhett's eyes narrowed, his body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. "Out of my way," he said, his voice dangerously low. The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I don't think so. Silas Thorne has a message for you. And for your lady friend." Josie felt a wave of fear wash over her. This was it. The confrontation they had been dreading. She looked at Rhett, her eyes pleading, but he was focused on the man in front of them, his expression a mask of controlled fury. "I don't take messages from Thorne," Rhett said, his voice cold and steady. "Especially not delivered by his dogs." The man's hand tightened on his gun. "You'll listen to this one," he said, his voice menacing. "Thorne says he's coming for you, Callahan. And he's going to make you pay for what you did. He's going to take everything you hold dear, just like you took everything from him." Rhett's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with anger. "He took everything from me," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my life, my love, my future." The man laughed again, a cruel, mocking sound. "You're a dead man, Callahan. And your little bride, she'll be begging for mercy before Thorne is through with her." Josie felt a surge of anger, overriding her fear. She stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not afraid of Silas Thorne," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And I'm not afraid of you." The man looked at her, surprised by her boldness. He had expected her to cower, to beg, to plead. But she stood her ground, her eyes blazing with defiance. Rhett put his arm around her, pulling her close. "Don't underestimate him, Josie," he said, his voice low and warning. "Thorne is ruthless. He'll stop at nothing." He turned back to the man, his eyes cold and hard. "Tell Thorne I'm not running," he said. "Tell him I'm waiting for him. And tell him to come prepared." The man hesitated, his eyes flickering between Rhett and Josie. He had expected an easy victory, a quick capture. But he had underestimated them, underestimated their courage, their determination. "This ain't over, Callahan," he said, his voice less confident than before. "You can't hide from Thorne forever." "I'm not hiding," Rhett replied, his voice firm. "I'm waiting." With a final, lingering look, the man turned and disappeared back into the saloon. Rhett and Josie exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the danger they were in. They slipped out the back door, into the darkness of the alley. Rhett led Josie quickly through the maze of narrow streets, his senses on high alert. They needed to get out of Silver Creek to find a safe place to regroup, to plan their next move. As they walked, Josie couldn't help but think about Sarah, about the woman Rhett had loved and lost. She understood now the depth of his pain, the source of his anger, the reason for his vendetta against Silas Thorne. "Rhett," she said, her voice soft. Do you think Sarah is still alive?" He was silent for a moment, his steps faltering. "I don't know, Josie," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "I've searched for her for years, followed every lead, every rumor. But I've found nothing. Thorne is careful, he covers his tracks well. But you haven't given up hope," Josie said, her voice firm. He looked at her, a flicker of something akin to hope in his eyes. "No," he said. "I haven't. As long as there's a chance, I'll keep searching. I owe her that." Josie nodded, her heart aching for him. She knew that Sarah's ghost would always be between them, a shadow of the past that could never be fully erased. But she also knew that she loved Rhett, with all his scars, with all his baggage, with all his demons. She was willing to fight for him, to stand by his side, no matter the cost. The scars of yesterday were deep, etched into their souls, shaping their destinies. But they were also a source of strength, a reminder of the battles they had fought, the losses they had endured. And as they walked hand in hand through the darkness, they knew that they were not alone, that they had each other, and that together, they could face whatever the future held. The past was a heavy burden, but it was also a foundation upon which they could build a new life, a life forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the unwavering flame of love. Chapter 8. Beneath a Sky of Secrets. They left Silver Creek under the cloak of a moonless night, the darkness providing a fragile shield against the ever-present threat of discovery. The air was cold and crisp, the silence broken only by the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves and the occasional howl of a distant coyote. The vast, star-studded sky stretched above them, a silent witness to their flight, a reminder of the immensity of the world and the precariousness of their situation. Rhett led them on a winding trail, away from the main roads, towards the rugged mountains that loomed in the distance. He knew these lands well, the hidden canyons, the secret passes, the places where a man could disappear, at least for a while. Josie rode in silence, her mind racing, her emotions a turbulent mix of fear, excitement, and a growing sense of determination. She had made her choice. She had thrown her lot in with Rhett, and she would not waver, no matter the cost. As they rode, she couldn't help but reflect on the events of the past few days. Her life had been turned upside down, her world shattered, her future uncertain. But she had also found something she had never expected, a love that was both terrifying and exhilarating, a connection that ran deeper than anything she had ever known. She looked at Rhett, his silhouette outlined against the starlit sky. He was a man of contradictions, a hardened outlaw with a tender heart, a ruthless fighter with a deep capacity for love. He was a mystery, a puzzle she was slowly piecing together, one revelation at a time. "Rhett," she said, breaking the silence. "Where are we going?" He glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "I told you," he said. "To a hidden valley. A place where we can be safe, at least for a while." "But what then?" Josie asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "We can't hide forever. Thorn will keep coming after us." Rhett sighed, his expression troubled. "I know," he said. "But we need time. Time to plan, to prepare, to find a way to fight back." "And what about my father?" Josie asked, a pang of guilt twisting in her stomach. "He won't give up either. He'll be furious." "He'll have to get in line," Rhett said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "He's not the only one who wants a piece of us." Josie fell silent, her thoughts troubled. She had never imagined her life would take this turn, that she would be caught in a crossfire between two powerful men, her father and Rhett's sworn enemy. She felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. Rhett, sensing her distress, reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "Don't worry, Josie," he said. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." Josie looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and trust. She knew he meant it, that he would protect her with his life. But she also knew that promises were fragile things, easily broken in this harsh and unforgiving world. They rode on, the silence between them broken only by the occasional whispered word, the shared glances, the unspoken understanding that passed between them. They were two souls, bound together by a shared destiny, facing an uncertain future. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, they reached the entrance to the hidden valley. It was a narrow, winding canyon, concealed by towering cliffs and dense vegetation. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, a sanctuary from the outside world. Rhett led them through the canyon, the air growing cooler, the vegetation lusher. They reached a clearing, where a small cabin stood nestled among the trees. It was a simple structure, made of logs and stone, but it was solid and well-built, a testament to the skill and determination of its creator. "This is it," Rhett said, dismounting. "This is where I used to come, years ago, when I needed to escape. It's been abandoned for a long time, but it should still be habitable." Josie dismounted as well, her legs stiff and sore. She looked around, taking in the beauty of the valley. It was a peaceful place, a haven from the storms that raged outside. But it was also a prison, a place of isolation, a reminder of the life they had left behind. Rhett led her inside the cabin. It was sparsely furnished, with a simple bed, a table, and a few chairs. A fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. But it was clean and dry, a welcome refuge from the elements. "We'll stay here for a few days," Rhett said. "Rest, recover, and figure out our next move." Josie nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They were safe for now. But the sky above them, though beautiful, was filled with secrets, with the unspoken threats that hung heavy in the air. Their sanctuary was also a cage, and the vastness of the world outside, with all its dangers, was a constant, looming presence. The dance with danger was far from over, and beneath the seemingly tranquil sky, the whispers of the past and the threats of the future continued to swirl, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their freedom and the enduring power of their forbidden love. Chapter 9. The Heart's Rebellion. The days in the hidden valley passed in a strange mix of tranquility and tension. The natural beauty of their surroundings, the towering cliffs, the lush vegetation, the clear, sparkling stream, provided a soothing balm to their frayed nerves. But the ever-present threat of discovery, the knowledge that they were hunted, cast a long shadow over their refuge. Josie, despite her initial apprehension, found herself adapting to the rustic life. She learned to gather firewood, to cook over an open fire, to draw water from the stream. She discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed, a strength that came from facing adversity head-on. Rhett, too, seemed to find a measure of peace in the valley. He spent his days tending to the horse, repairing the cabin, hunting for game. He was a man of action, comfortable in the wilderness, and the simplicity of their existence seemed to soothe his restless spirit. But the nights were different. The darkness brought with it a heightened awareness of their isolation, of their vulnerability. The sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of owls, the distant howl of coyotes, amplified their fears, their anxieties. And it was during those long, dark nights that the emotional walls between them began to crumble. The shared danger, the forced intimacy, the unspoken understanding drew them closer, forging a bond that went beyond mere physical attraction. They would sit by the fire, talking for hours, sharing their stories, their dreams, their fears. Josie learned more about Rhett's past, about the hardships he had endured, the betrayals he had suffered. She saw the pain behind his eyes, the vulnerability he tried so hard to conceal. And Rhett, in turn, saw Josie's strength, her resilience, her unwavering loyalty. He saw the woman she was, not the pampered society girl she had once been. He saw her beauty, not just the physical, but the inner beauty that shone through her eyes, her smile, her every gesture. One night, as they sat by the fire, the silence between them grew heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Rhett reached out and took Josie's hand, his touch gentle and hesitant. She looked at him, her eyes questioning, and he saw a vulnerability in her gaze that mirrored his own. "Josie," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I never thought I could feel this way again. After Sarah, after everything that happened, I thought my heart was dead." Josie squeezed his hand, her heart aching for him.
"I know," she said softly. "But it's not, Rhett.
"It's alive. And it's beating for me." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. "You love me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Josie nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "I love you, Rhett Callahan. With all my heart." He pulled her close, his arms encircling her, holding her tight. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling with emotion. "I love you too, Josie," he said, his voice choked with feeling. "More than words can say." They held each other for a long time, the silence broken only by the crackling of the fire and the soft murmur of their breathing. It was a moment of pure connection, a moment of unbridled emotion, a moment when the walls between them finally came crashing down. They kissed, a long, slow, passionate kiss that sealed their bond, that promised a future, however uncertain. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of desire, of a love that had defied all odds. The heart's rebellion, long suppressed, had finally broken free. The gilded cage, the societal expectations, the shadows of the past, all faded away, leaving only the two of them, wrapped in each other's arms, beneath the vast, starlit sky. But even in this moment of blissful connection, a shadow of doubt lingered. The outside world, with all its dangers, was still there, waiting for them. Their love was a fragile flame, flickering in the darkness, threatened by the winds of fate. As they lay together, wrapped in a blanket, watching the embers of the fire slowly die, Josie couldn't help but wonder if their love was strong enough to survive the storms that awaited them. The valley was a sanctuary, a temporary reprieve, but it was also a reminder of their isolation, of their vulnerability. The heart had rebelled, and in its rebellion, it had found both solace and a new, terrifying kind of exposure. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but in each other's arms, they found the courage to face it, hand in hand, heart to heart, ready to defy the world for the sake of their love. Chapter 10. Echoes of Betrayal. Their idyllic interlude couldn't last. The 10th day in the valley dawned with an unsettling stillness, a heavy silence that hung in the air like a premonition. The usual symphony of birdsong was absent, the rustling leaves strangely muted, the very air itself seemed to hold its breath. Rhett, ever vigilant, sensed the change immediately. He woke with a start, his hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. He scanned the surroundings, his eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I can feel it." Josie, awakened by a sudden movement, felt a shiver of apprehension run down her spine. She, too, sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle change that signaled danger. They dressed quickly, their movements hurried and silent. Rhett checked his weapons, his face grim, his body tense. He knew they couldn't stay in the valley any longer. The sanctuary had become a trap. As they prepared to leave, they heard a distant sound, a faint but unmistakable rumble that grew steadily louder. It was the sound of horses, many horses, approaching fast. Rhett's eyes widened in alarm. "They've found us," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to go.
Now."
He grabbed Josie's hand and they ran, scrambling through the undergrowth, towards a hidden path that led out of the valley. The sound of the horses grew closer, the thundering hooves echoing through the canyon. They reached the path, a narrow, treacherous trail that wound its way up the steep cliff face. It was their only escape, but it was also a dangerous one, exposed and vulnerable. As they started to climb, they heard shouts, the unmistakable voices of their pursuers. They were close, too close. Rhett pushed Josie ahead of him, urging her to climb faster. He kept looking back, his revolver drawn, ready to defend them. Suddenly, a shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past Rhett's head, embedding itself in the rock face. They were under attack. Rhett returned fire, his shots echoing through the canyon. He saw one of the riders fall, but there were many more, closing in fast. They continued to climb, scrambling over rocks, dodging bullets, their lungs burning, their muscles screaming. They were trapped between the cliff face and their pursuers, with no place to hide. As they reached a narrow ledge, Rhett stopped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Josie, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination.
"We can't outrun them," he said. "We have to make a stand."
Josie nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew he was right. They were out of options. They took cover behind a large boulder, their backs against the cold, hard rock. Rhett reloaded his revolver, his movements quick and practiced. "Stay down," he said, his voice low and urgent. "And don't shoot unless you have to." Josie nodded, her hands trembling. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she knew she would do whatever it took to survive, to protect Rhett. The riders appeared, their horses scrambling up the narrow path. They were a motley crew, rough-looking men with hard faces and menacing eyes. Leading them was a figure Josie recognized, a man she had hoped never to see again. Silas Thorne. He was older than she remembered, his face more weathered, his eyes colder. But he still exuded the same aura of ruthless power, the same menacing presence that had haunted her nightmares. He rode with his usual arrogance. It made Josie's heart burn with a feeling so unexpected she almost missed what he had said. "Callahan!" Thorne shouted, his voice echoing through the canyon. It's over. Give yourself up. And hand over the girl. Rhett's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with anger. Never, he replied, his voice ringing with defiance. Thorne laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. You have no choice, Callahan. You're outnumbered, outgunned. You're finished. I'm not afraid of you, Thorne, Rhett said, his voice cold and steady. I've been waiting for this. For a long time. Thorne's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. You think you can beat me? He sneered. You're a fool, Callahan. A dead fool. But then a new voice called out. He ain't alone, Thorne. Josie's head whipped around, and then up, her eyes wide. It couldn't be. But it was. Her father, Silas Hollis, stood atop the cliff, rifle in hand, and beside him, Benjamin Carter. The echoes of betrayal reverberated through the canyon, not just from Thorne's presence, but from the unexpected alliance that stood above them, a twisted tapestry of past grievances and present dangers. Josie's world, already shattered, seemed to fracture once more, the lines between friend and foe blurring into a chaotic, terrifying landscape. The battle was about to begin, and it was clear that it would be fought not just with bullets, but with the ghosts of the past, the weight of betrayal, and the enduring power of love and loyalty. Chapter 11. A Haven in the Storm. The sight of her father standing alongside Silas Thorne, their shared animosity towards Rhett uniting them in an unholy alliance, sent a fresh wave of shock and despair through Josie. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any bullet, a confirmation of her father's unwavering commitment to his own ambitions, even if it meant aligning himself with a man like Thorne. And Benjamin standing there, a mixture of anger and what looked shockingly like relief in his eyes, twisted the knife further. Father. Josie cried out, her voice a desperate plea lost in the vastness of the canyon. What are you doing? Silas Hollis's voice, amplified by the natural acoustics of the canyon, boomed down at them. I'm taking you back, Josie. Where you belong. Away from this outlaw. She belongs with me, Rhett retorted, his voice filled with a fierce possessiveness that both thrilled and terrified Josie. Thorne laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. You're delusional, Callahan. You think you can stand against us? Against the combined might of Hollis and Thorne? I'm not afraid of you, Thorne, Rhett repeated, his voice unwavering.
Eva faced vers.
He raised his revolver, taking aim. Before either side could fire, a new voice cut through the tense standoff. Hold your fire. It was a woman's voice, strong and commanding, echoing from the depths of the canyon. Everyone turned, their attention drawn to the source of the interruption. Emerging from the shadows, riding a magnificent white stallion, was a figure that seemed to have stepped straight out of a legend. She was tall and striking, with long, flowing silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through them. She wore a simple, but elegant riding outfit, and a silver concho belt adorned her waist.
Who are you?
Thorne demanded, his voice filled with suspicion. The woman ignored him, her gaze fixed on Rhett. Rhett Callahan, she said, her voice soft but firm. I've been looking for you. Rhett stared at her, his eyes widening in disbelief. Aunt Esme? He said, his voice barely a whisper. Josie looked at Rhett, her eyes questioning. She had never heard him mention an aunt, especially one who looked like a legendary frontier warrior. Esme nodded, a small smile playing on her lips.
It's been a long time, nephew, she said.
Too long. She turned her gaze to Silas Thorne, her expression hardening. Silas Thorne, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I should have known you'd be involved in this. You always did have a knack for causing trouble. Thorne scoffed. Esme Lancaster, he said, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. I haven't seen you in years. What are you doing here? I'm here to protect my nephew, Esme replied, her voice firm, and to settle an old score. She looked at Silas Hollis, her eyes narrowing. And you, Silas Hollis, she said. I'm disappointed in you. I thought you had more sense than to align yourself with this snake. Silas Hollis shifted uncomfortably, his gaze avoiding Esme's. This is a family matter, Esme, he said. It doesn't concern you. Anything that concerns my nephew concerns me, Esme replied, her voice unwavering. And I won't stand by and watch you harm him, or the woman he loves. She turned to Josie, her expression softening.
You must be Josie, she said. Red has told me about you.
You're a brave woman. Josie nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. This unexpected ally, this legendary figure from Rhett's past, had arrived like an angel of mercy, a beacon of hope in a gathering storm. We need to get out of here, Esme said, turning back to Rhett. This is not the place for a fight. I have a ranch nearby, a safe haven. We can go there, regroup, and plan our next move. Rhett nodded, his trust in his aunt evident. He knew she wouldn't lead them astray. She had always been a strong and independent woman, a force to be reckoned with. They carefully made their way down, under Esme's watchful eye. Thorne, furious at this turn of events, watched them go. He made to stop them, but one look from Esme Lancaster made even his men flinch. As they rode away, Josie looked back at her father, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and betrayal. He stood there, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, watching her disappear into the distance. Benjamin looked almost glad. The canyon walls seemed to echo with unspoken words, with the shattered remnants of family ties and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The storm had been temporarily averted, but the haven they were heading towards was only a temporary respite, a brief pause before the inevitable confrontation that awaited them. Chapter 12. Unspoken Truths. Esme Lancaster's ranch was a stark contrast to the hidden valley. It was a sprawling, working ranch, nestled in a fertile valley, surrounded by rolling hills and grazing cattle. The main house, a large, two-story structure built of adobe and stone, exuded an aura of strength and permanence. It was a place of stability, a testament to Esme's resilience and determination. As they approached the ranch, Josie felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was a haven, a place where they could rest, recover, and plan their next move. But it was also a reminder of the world they had left behind, the world of civilized society, the world where she had once belonged. Esme welcomed them warmly, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and affection. She had a commanding presence, but there was also a warmth and kindness about her that put Josie at ease. Come in, she said, ushering them into the house. You must be exhausted. I'll have Maria prepare some food and show you to your rooms. Maria, the housekeeper, a stout, middle-aged woman with a kind face, greeted them with a smile. She led Josie to a spacious, comfortable room, decorated with simple but elegant furnishings. It was a welcome change from the rough conditions they had endured in the hidden valley. After washing up and changing into fresh clothes, Josie joined Rhett and Esme in the large, comfortable living room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baking bread. They sat down to a hearty meal, the first real meal they had eaten in days. As they ate, Esme questioned them about their ordeal, her eyes filled with concern. Rhett recounted the events of the past few weeks, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and frustration. I should have known Thorne wouldn't give up, he said, his jaw clenching. He's obsessed with revenge. He always was a bitter, twisted man, Esme said, her voice filled with disdain. He blames everyone but himself for his failures. Josie, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. But why my father? She asked, her voice filled with confusion. Why would he align himself with Thorne? He hates outlaws. Esme sighed, her expression troubled. Silas Hollis is a complicated man, Josie, she said. He's driven by ambition, by a desire for power and control. He sees you as a means to an end, a way to solidify his legacy. But he's my father, Josie said, her voice trembling. He's supposed to protect me. Some fathers are more concerned with their own ambitions than with their children's happiness, Esme said, her voice softening.
I'm sorry, Josie.
I know this is hard for you. Josie nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She had always known her father was a hard man, but she had never realized the extent of his ruthlessness. Rhett reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "Don't worry, Josie," he said. "I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." Esme looked at them, her eyes filled with affection. "You two have something special," she said. "A love that can withstand anything. Don't let anyone take that away from you." After the meal, Esme turned to Rhett, her expression serious. "Rhett," she said, "there's something you need to know. Something about Sarah." Rhett's eyes widened in surprise. "Sarah?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What about her?" Esme hesitated, her gaze shifting to Josie.
"It's a long story," she said.
"And it's not easy to hear." "I need to know," Rhett said, his voice firm. "Whatever it is, I need to know." Esme took a deep breath and began to speak. "After Sarah's father died, and she was forced to marry Thorn, I tried to help her," she said. "I knew she was unhappy, that she was trapped. I tried to convince her to run away, to come with me." Rhett listened intently, his body tense, his eyes fixed on Esme. "But she was afraid," Esme continued. "She said Thorn would kill her, would kill anyone who tried to help her." She was broken, Rhett. She had lost all hope. Esme went silent for a moment as she looked down. "One day, I went to see her. She told me the truth. Thorn had lied. He had said that you had told him all about your plans with Sarah, that you had decided Josie's family fortune was too good to pass up. He had shown her a forged letter in your handwriting. She believed him. It broke her." Josie gasped. Rhett, he had never done any of that. Sarah had died believing a lie. Esme finally looked back to Rhett. "Sarah didn't run away, Rhett," Esme said softly. "She took her own life. She couldn't bear the thought of living without you, believing you had betrayed her." Rhett stared at Esme, his face ashen, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and grief. The unspoken truths, the lies that had shaped his life, had finally been revealed. The weight of the past, the burden of his loss, crashed down on him, leaving him shattered and broken. Josie reached out to him, her heart aching for his pain, but he seemed to be in a world of his own, lost in the echoes of betrayal and the tragic reality of Sarah's fate. The Haven had become a crucible, a place where the past had caught up with them, forcing them to confront the painful truths that had shaped their lives. Chapter 13. The Devil's Bargain. The revelation of Sarah's tragic fate and the cruel deception that had led to her death hung heavy in the air, casting a pall over the room. Rhett sat in stunned silence, his face pale, his eyes filled with a pain that Josie could only imagine. She reached out to him, her hand covering his, offering what comfort she could. Esme watched her nephew with a mixture of sadness and compassion. She knew the pain he was feeling, the weight of the guilt and regret that had suddenly crashed down upon him. "I'm so sorry, Rhett," she said softly. "I know this is hard, but you needed to know the truth." Rhett finally looked up, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing grief. "She died believing I had betrayed her," he said, his voice hoarse. "She died hating me. She died loving you, Rhett," Esme corrected gently. "Thorn's lies, they were cruel, but they couldn't change what was in her heart. She loved you until the very end." Rhett closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He had carried the burden of Sarah's disappearance for years, blaming himself, wondering if he could have done something to save her. Now, he knew the truth, and it was even more devastating than he had imagined. Josie held his hand tightly, her heart aching for him. She wished she could take away his pain, erase the years of suffering, but she knew she couldn't. All she could do was be there for him, offer her love and support, help him navigate this new, agonizing reality. After a long silence, Rhett finally spoke, his voice filled with a renewed determination. "Thorn," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "He'll pay for this. He'll pay for everything." Esme nodded, her eyes hardening. "He will," she said. "But we need to be smart about this, Rhett. Thorn is powerful. He has connections. We can't just ride in guns blazing." "I don't care," Rhett said, his voice rising in anger. "I want him dead." I want him to suffer. I understand your anger, Rhett, Esme said calmly. But revenge won't bring Sarah back. It won't ease your pain. We need to focus on justice, on making sure Thorn can't hurt anyone else. They spent the rest of the evening discussing their options, weighing the risks and benefits of different courses of action. Esme, with her years of experience and her network of contacts, proved to be an invaluable ally. She knew the territory, she knew the players, and she knew how to navigate the dangerous world of frontier justice. As they talked, a plan began to take shape, a risky, dangerous plan that involved exposing Thorn's crimes, rallying support from those he had wronged, and ultimately, bringing him to justice. It was a long shot, but it was their best hope. Late that night, as Josie and Rhett lay in bed, the silence between them was heavy with unspoken emotions. Josie reached out and touched Rhett's face, her fingers tracing the lines of pain and grief that were etched there.
Rhett, she said softly.
I know this is hard, but you're not alone. I'm here for you. We'll face this together. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and love. I don't know what I would do without you, Josie, he said, his voice hoarse. You're my strength, my anchor. He pulled her close, holding her tight, as if afraid to let go. They lay there for a long time, finding solace in each other's embrace, drawing strength from their shared love. The next morning, as they prepared to leave Esme's ranch, a rider approached, carrying a message. It was from Silas Thorn. Esme read the message, her face darkening with anger. He's proposing a bargain, she said, her voice tight with disbelief. What kind of bargain? Rhett asked, his eyes narrowing. He says he'll leave you and Josie alone. He'll call off his men if you agree to meet him. Alone. Esme crumpled the paper in her hand, her knuckles white. He's lying, Rhett said, his voice cold and hard. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Esme said. But it also presents an opportunity. A chance to confront him, to expose him, to end this once and for all. Josie felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. The thought of Rhett facing Thorn alone was terrifying. But she also knew that this might be their only chance to bring him to justice, to finally put an end to the years of pain and suffering. What do you think, Rhett? Josie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Rhett looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and concern. He knew the risks, he knew the dangers, but he also knew that he couldn't run forever. He had to face Thorn, not just for himself, but for Sarah, for Josie, for everyone Thorn had wronged. It was a devil's bargain, a dangerous gamble, but it was a chance, perhaps their only chance, to finally break free from the shadows of the past and forge a future where love and justice could prevail. Chapter 14. Trails of Tears and Hope. The decision hung heavy in the air, a weight that pressed down on them with the force of a coming storm. Rhett paced the room, his mind racing, weighing the risks and the potential rewards of Thorn's treacherous offer. He knew it was a trap, a carefully laid snare designed to lure him to his doom. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to confront his nemesis, to finally settle the score. Josie watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and admiration. She knew the pain he was carrying, the burden of Sarah's death, the burning desire for revenge. But she also saw his strength, his courage, his unwavering commitment to protecting her. Rhett, she said softly, reaching out to him. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. He stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that belied his hardened exterior. I have to, Josie, he said. For Sarah.
For us.
For everyone Thorn has hurt. I can't run forever. I have to face him. Josie nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She knew he was right. There was no other way. They had to confront Thorn, not just for themselves, but for all those who had suffered under his cruel reign. Esme, who had been silent until now, spoke up. If you're going to do this, Rhett, she said, you're not going alone. I'll be there, watching your back. And I'll have some of my men nearby, ready to intervene, if necessary. Rhett shook his head. No, Aunt Esme, he said. This is my fight. I have to face Thorn alone. That's the only way he'll agree to meet. But it's too dangerous, Josie protested, her voice filled with fear.
He'll kill you. Red smiled, a sad, knowing smile.
Maybe, he said, but I won't make it easy for him. And I have faith that I can outsmart him. I know his weaknesses, his flaws. I've been studying him for years. They spent the rest of the day preparing, making plans, strategizing. Esme, despite Rhett's protests, insisted on providing him with a small, concealed derringer, a last resort weapon that he could use if things went wrong. As the sun began to set, Rhett prepared to leave. He embraced Josie, holding her tight, as if afraid to let go. I love you, Josie, he said, his voice choked with emotion. No matter what happens, remember that. I love you more than anything. Josie clung to him, tears streaming down her face. I love you too, Rhett, she said. Please be careful. Come back to me. He kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that spoke of love, of longing, of a future they might never share. Then, he mounted his horse and rode off, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Josie watched him go, her heart filled with a mixture of dread and hope. She knew the risks, she knew the dangers, but she also had faith in Rhett, in his strength, his courage, his cunning. She and Esme returned to the ranch house, where they waited, their nerves on edge, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The hours stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. As the night wore on, a storm began to brew, the wind howling, the rain lashing against the windows. The weather mirrored their inner turmoil, the tempestuous emotions that raged within them. Suddenly, they heard a sound, the faint but unmistakable sound of gunfire in the distance. Josie's heart leaped into her throat. The confrontation had begun. Esme grabbed her rifle, her face grim. Stay here, Josie, she said. I'm going to check it out. Josie wanted to protest, to go with her, but she knew Esme was right. She would only be a hindrance. She waited, pacing the floor, her hands clasped tightly together, praying for Rhett's safety. The gunfire continued, sporadic bursts of violence that echoed through the night. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the shooting stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, a heavy, ominous quiet that spoke of uncertainty, of loss, of a future that hung precariously in the balance. Josie stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the darkness, straining to see any sign of movement, any indication of what had happened. The trail of tears she had shed throughout this ordeal seemed to mingle with the rain that lashed against the glass, a testament to the pain and the hope that warred within her. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, but somewhere, in the heart of the storm, she clung to the fragile belief that love, like a persistent ember, could survive even the fiercest of gales. Chapter 15. A Flame in the Darkness. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the roof and the frantic beating of Josie's heart. Each minute felt like an hour, each hour an eternity. She paced the room, her hands clasped tightly together, her mind racing with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. She imagined Rhett, facing Thorn alone, outnumbered, outgunned. She imagined the cruel smile on Thorn's face, the glint of malice in his eyes. She imagined the worst, and the fear threatened to consume her. But she fought it back, clinging to the memory of Rhett's strength, his courage, his unwavering love. She had to believe, she had to hope, that he would survive, that he would return to her. Suddenly, she heard a sound, the faint but unmistakable sound of a horse approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it Rhett? Or was it Thorn, coming to deliver the news of her worst nightmare? She ran to the door, her hands trembling as she reached for the latch. She hesitated, her fear battling with her desperate need to know. Then, she heard a voice she knew and loved, a voice that sent a wave of relief washing over her. Josie, it's me. It was Rhett. He was alive. She threw open the door, and there he was, standing in the pouring rain, his clothes soaked, his face streaked with mud and blood, but alive. She rushed into his arms, holding him tight, burying her face in his chest, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You're alive," she sobbed. "You're alive." He held her close, his arms wrapped around her, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. "I'm here, Josie," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm here." They stood there for a long time, oblivious to the rain, lost in the joy of their reunion. The storm raged around them, but they were safe, wrapped in each other's embrace, their love a flame that burned brightly in the darkness. Finally, they pulled apart, their eyes meeting, their smiles tentative, but filled with a profound sense of gratitude. "What happened?" Josie asked, her voice trembling.
"Tell me everything."
Rhett led her inside, and Esme, who had returned, her face etched with relief, helped them both out of their wet clothes and wrapped them in warm blankets. As they sat by the fire, sipping hot coffee, Rhett recounted the events of the night. He had met Thorn at the agreed-upon location, an abandoned mine shaft on the outskirts of Silver Creek. Thorn had brought his men, of course, despite his promise of a solitary meeting. "It was a trap, just like we expected," Rhett said, his voice grim. "But I was prepared. I knew he wouldn't play fair." He described the ensuing gunfight, the chaos, the confusion, the close calls. He had managed to outsmart Thorn, using his knowledge of the mine shaft to his advantage, picking off Thorn's men one by one. "But Thorn, he got away," Rhett said, his voice filled with frustration. "I wounded him, I know I did, but he managed to escape."
"He's still out there."
Josie felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. Thorn was still alive, still a threat. The fight was not over. "But we have something he doesn't," Rhett said, his eyes meeting Josie's. "We have each other. And we have the truth. We know what he did to Sarah, and we can use that against him." He explained that during the confrontation, he had managed to get Thorn to confess, to admit his crimes, to reveal the truth about Sarah's death. And unknown to Thorn, Rhett had been wearing a small, concealed recording device, a new invention that Esme had acquired. "We have proof," Rhett said, his voice filled with a mixture of triumph and relief. "We have evidence that can bring him down." They also discovered, much to everyone's shock, that Benjamin had made his way to the mine and had overheard everything. He said he finally understood, Rhett told Josie.
"He helped me."
He distracted some of Thorn's men. The flame in the darkness, the love that had sustained them through so much hardship, had also ignited a spark of redemption in an unexpected place. The storm had raged, but it had also cleared the air, revealing the truth, exposing the lies, and forging new alliances. The fight was far from over, but they had gained a powerful weapon, a weapon that could finally bring Thorn to justice and allow them to build a future free from the shadows of the past. Chapter 16. Reckoning at Dawn. The recording of Thorn's confession was their trump card, the key to his downfall. But they knew they couldn't simply take it to the local sheriff, a man known to be corrupt and easily swayed by Thorn's influence. They needed a higher authority, someone they could trust, someone who would be immune to Thorn's power and wealth. Esme, with her extensive network of contacts, suggested they take the recording to Judge Parker, a federal judge known for his integrity and his unwavering commitment to justice. He was stationed in Fort Smith, a several-day ride from the ranch, but it was their best hope. They decided that Rhett and Josie, accompanied by Esme and a few of her trusted ranch hands, would make the journey to Fort Smith. They would travel in secret, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the less traveled trails, minimizing the risk of encountering Thorn's men. Before they left, Josie insisted on visiting her father. She knew he had betrayed her, that he had aligned himself with Thorn, but he was still her father, and she couldn't simply abandon him. She found him at his ranch, a broken and defeated man. The alliance with Thorn had backfired, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He had lost everything, his reputation, his wealth, and now his daughter. "Father," Josie said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and compassion. "I'm leaving. I'm going to Fort Smith, to seek justice for Rhett, for Sarah, for everyone Thorn has wronged." Silas Hollis looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. I made a mistake, Josie, he said, his voice hoarse. "A terrible mistake. I let my ambition, my pride, blind me.
I'm sorry.
Josie reached out and took his hand, her heart aching for him. I know, Father, she said. But it's not too late. You can still do the right thing. You can help us. Silas Hollis hesitated, his eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and shame. He knew that helping them would mean turning against Thorn, a dangerous and powerful enemy. I don't know, Josie, he said.
I'm afraid.
I understand, Josie said. But you're not alone. We'll protect you. And you'll be on the right side of justice. Silas Hollis finally nodded, his decision made. He would help them. He would testify against Thorn. He would do whatever it took to atone for his past mistakes. With Silas Hollis's support, their chances of success increased significantly. He knew Thorn's secrets, his weaknesses, his connections. He could provide invaluable information that would help them build their case. The journey to Fort Smith was arduous and dangerous, but they traveled with a renewed sense of hope, their determination fueled by the prospect of finally bringing Thorn to justice. They arrived in Fort Smith under the cover of darkness, slipping into the town unnoticed. They met with Judge Parker, a stern but fair man, who listened intently to their story, his eyes narrowing with anger as he heard the recording of Thorn's confession. This is outrageous, he said, his voice filled with indignation. This man is a menace. He will be brought to justice. Judge Parker issued a warrant for Thorn's arrest, and he dispatched a company of U.S. Marshals to apprehend him. He also ordered protection for Rhett, Josie, Silas, and Esme, ensuring their safety. The reckoning was at hand. The final confrontation was about to begin. The Marshals, accompanied by Rhett, Esme, and Silas, rode out to Thorn's ranch, prepared for a fight. They found Thorn, surrounded by his men, ready to resist arrest. A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the nervous shuffling of horses and the whispered commands of the marshals. Silas Thorn, the marshal in charge, announced, his voice booming across the open space. You are under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and a host of other crimes. Surrender peacefully, and no one needs to get hurt. Thorn laughed, a cold, defiant sound. You think you can arrest me? He sneered. I am Silas Thorn. I am untouchable. No one is untouchable, Thorn, Rhett said, his voice ringing with determination. Your reign of terror is over. Thorn's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on Rhett. You, he spat. You're the one who did this. You're the one who turned everyone against me. You did this to yourself. Thorn, Rhett replied. Your greed, your cruelty, your lies, they finally caught up with you. Thorn, realizing he was cornered, his men outnumbered and outgunned, finally surrendered. The reckoning, long awaited, had arrived. The dawn broke, casting a golden light over the scene, a symbol of hope, of justice, of a new beginning. The trails of tears and hope had led them to this moment, a moment of triumph, a moment of closure, a moment when the shadows of the past began to recede, replaced by the promise of a brighter future. Chapter 17. The Cost of Loyalty. The arrest of Silas Thorn marked a turning point, a moment of triumph, but it was not the end of the story. The wheels of justice turned slowly, and the legal proceedings that followed were long and arduous. Thorn, despite the overwhelming evidence against him, fought tooth and nail, using his wealth and influence to try to manipulate the system, to delay the inevitable. Rhett and Josie, along with Esme and Silas Hollis, found themselves caught in a web of legal wrangling, forced to testify, to relive the painful events of the past, to face the scrutiny of the court and the public. The trial was held in Fort Smith, and the small town was transformed into a media circus. Reporters from across the territory flocked to cover the proceedings, eager to capture every detail of the sensational case. The courtroom was packed each day, filled with spectators, witnesses, and the curious onlookers who had come to witness the downfall of a once powerful man. Josie, despite her initial reluctance, found herself playing a central role in the trial. She testified about her forced engagement to Benjamin Carter, about Rhett's dramatic rescue, about the subsequent events that had led them to this point. She spoke with courage and conviction, her voice clear and strong, her testimony painting a vivid picture of Thorne's cruelty and Rhett's unwavering determination to protect her. Rhett, too, testified, recounting his past with Sarah, his discovery of Thorne's crimes, his long quest for revenge. He spoke with a raw honesty that moved the courtroom, his pain and his anger palpable. Silas Hollis, in a dramatic turn of events, took the stand and testified against Thorne, revealing the details of their past dealings, exposing Thorne's corruption and his ruthless methods. It was a moment of redemption for Silas, a chance to atone for his past mistakes, to finally choose the right side of justice. He admitted to forging the letter, under duress, and detailed everything he knew. Benjamin Carter also gave a surprise testimony, describing his shock at learning the truth about his almost father-in-law. But the most powerful testimony came from Esme Lancaster. She recounted her long history with Thorne, her knowledge of his crimes, her efforts to help Sarah. She spoke with a quiet dignity that commanded respect, her words carrying the weight of truth and experience. Thorne's defense team, a group of high-priced lawyers from back east, tried to discredit the witnesses, to paint Rhett as a vengeful outlaw, to portray Josie as a spoiled society girl who had run off with a dangerous criminal. But their efforts were in vain. The evidence against Thorne was overwhelming, and the testimony of the witnesses was too compelling to ignore. The trial lasted for weeks, a grueling ordeal that tested the strength and resilience of everyone involved. But finally, it came to an end. The jury, after deliberating for hours, returned with a verdict: guilty. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Thorne, his face ashen, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and rage, sat in stunned silence. Justice had been served. But even in this moment of triumph, there was a sense of sadness, a recognition of the cost of loyalty, the price that had been paid for freedom and justice. Sarah's life could never be restored, and the scars of the past would never fully heal. As the courtroom emptied, Josie and Rhett embraced, their tears mingling, their hearts filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. They had won, but they had also lost. The cost of loyalty, they realized, was high. It demanded sacrifice, courage, and unwavering commitment. But it was also a source of strength, a bond that could not be broken, a foundation upon which they could build a new life, a life free from the shadows of the past. The trial was over, but the journey continued, a journey of healing, of forgiveness, of rebuilding, a journey that would test their love and their loyalty in ways they could never have imagined. Chapter 18. Where the Heart Belongs. With Thorne's conviction, a chapter closed, but another began. The immediate threat was gone, the legal battles won, but the aftermath lingered, a complex tapestry of healing, rebuilding, and redefining their lives. Rhett and Josie returned to Esme's ranch, a place that had become a sanctuary, a symbol of resilience and hope. They needed time to heal, to process the events of the past few months, to decide what their future held. Josie, in particular, struggled with the conflicting emotions that churned within her. She had found love and freedom with Rhett, but she had also lost her family, her former life, her place in society. She was no longer Josie Hollis, the pampered daughter of a wealthy rancher. She was Josie Callahan, the wife of an outlaw, a woman who had defied convention, who had chosen a different path. She spent her days wandering the ranch, exploring the vast, open spaces, finding solace in the beauty of the natural world. She talked to Esme, confiding her fears, her doubts, her uncertainties. Esme, with her wisdom and her understanding, offered guidance and support, helping Josie navigate the complex emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Rhett, too, struggled with the aftermath of the trial. He had achieved his long-sought revenge, but it had brought him little satisfaction. Sarah was still gone, and the pain of her loss remained, a constant ache in his heart. He had to find a way to move forward, to build a new life, to honor Sarah's memory by living a life of purpose and meaning. He spent his days working on the ranch, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, losing himself in the physical labor. He found solace in a routine, in the tangible results of his efforts. It was a way to escape the demons that haunted him, the memories that threatened to consume him. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, Josie turned to Rhett, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Rhett," she said softly, "what are we going to do? Where do we go from here?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that belied his rugged exterior.
"I don't know, Josie," he said.
"I've spent so long chasing revenge, I haven't thought about anything else. But I know this. I want to be with you. Wherever we go, whatever we do, I want to do it with you." Josie smiled, tears welling up in her eyes.
"I want that too, Rhett," she said.
"But where do we belong? We don't fit in anywhere." Rhett took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "We'll make our own place, Josie," he said. "We'll build a life together, a life based on love, on trust, on respect. We'll create a place where we belong." They talked for hours, discussing their options, their dreams, their hopes for the future. They considered staying at Esme's ranch, becoming partners in her operation. They considered moving to a new territory, starting fresh, leaving the past behind. They considered buying their own ranch, building a home, creating a legacy. Finally, they made a decision. They would return to the hidden valley, the place where their love had blossomed, the place where they had found sanctuary amidst the storm. They would rebuild the cabin, make it their home, create a life that was both simple and meaningful. But before they could embark on their new adventure, Josie had one more thing to do. She needed to make peace with her father. She returned to the Hollis ranch, finding Silas a changed man. He had lost his wealth, his power, his reputation, but he had also found something he had lost long ago, his conscience. "Josie," he said, his voice filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry.
For everything.
I was a fool. I let my ambition blind me to what was truly important. My family, my daughter." Josie embraced him, tears streaming down her face. "I forgive you, Father," she said. "I understand. And I still love you." It was a moment of reconciliation, a healing of old wounds, a recognition that even in the darkest of times, love and forgiveness could prevail. As Josie and Rhett rode away from the Hollis ranch, heading towards the hidden valley, they knew that their journey was far from over. But they also knew that they were not alone, that they had each other, and that together, they could face anything. The question of where the heart belongs had been answered. It belonged not to a place, not to a social standing, not to a past filled with regret, but to a person, to a shared dream, to a love that had defied all odds. The hidden valley awaited them, a blank canvas upon which they would paint their future, a future filled with hope, with promise, with the enduring power of love. Chapter 19. Chasing Shadows. The return to the hidden valley was bittersweet. The natural beauty of the place remained, the towering cliffs, the lush vegetation, the clear, sparkling stream, all offering a sense of peace and tranquility. But the memories lingered, the echoes of their past struggles, the reminders of the dangers they had faced. The cabin, though still standing, showed signs of neglect. The roof leaked, the windows were broken, the furniture was dusty and worn. It was a shell of its former self, a reflection of the challenges they had overcome. Rhett and Josie set to work immediately, determined to rebuild the cabin, to make it their home, to create a sanctuary where they could heal and build their new life. They worked side by side, their hands busy, their hearts slowly mending. They repaired the roof, replaced the windows, cleaned and polished the furniture. They gathered firewood, stocked the pantry, planted a small garden. They transformed the neglected cabin into a cozy and welcoming home, a place where they could feel safe, secure, and loved. But even as they rebuilt their physical surroundings, they knew that the emotional rebuilding would take longer. The shadows of the past still lingered, the memories of Sarah, of Thorne, of the betrayals they had suffered, still haunted them. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Josie noticed Rhett staring into the flames, his eyes filled with a sadness that she knew all too well. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, reaching out to touch his hand. He looked at her, his expression troubled. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't help but wonder if things had been different if Thorn hadn't interfered." Josie squeezed his hand, her heart aching for him. "I know," she said. "But we can't change the past, Rhett. We can only learn from it and move forward." "But how?" he asked, his voice filled with frustration. "How do I move past the guilt, the regret, the what-ifs?" "By focusing on the present," Josie said. "By focusing on us, on our love, on the future we're building together." She knew it wouldn't be easy. The shadows of the past were persistent, always lurking in the corners of their minds, threatening to resurface. But she also knew that they were strong, that their love was resilient, that together they could overcome anything. As the days turned into weeks, they slowly began to heal. The routine of their daily lives, the simple tasks of tending to the cabin, caring for the animals, exploring the valley, helped to soothe their frayed nerves, to calm their troubled minds. They talked, they shared their feelings, they cried, they laughed. They rediscovered the joy of simple pleasures, the beauty of a sunset, the warmth of a shared embrace, the comfort of each other's presence. But just as they were beginning to find a measure of peace, a new threat emerged, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. One morning, as Rhett was returning from a hunting trip, he noticed something unusual: fresh tracks, the signs of a recent encampment, near the entrance to the valley. Someone had been there, someone who knew about their hidden refuge. He returned to the cabin, his face grim, his body tense. "We're not alone, Josie," he said. "Someone's been watching us." Josie felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. Who could it be? Thorn's men? Bounty hunters? Or someone else, someone with a different agenda? They searched the area, but found no further clues. The intruders had been careful, leaving little trace of their presence. But their visit was a clear warning. They were not safe. The shadows of the past were still chasing them. Rhett and Josie knew they had to be vigilant, to be prepared for anything. They fortified the cabin, set up traps, kept watch throughout the night. They were determined to protect their home, their love, their hard-won peace. The tranquility of the valley had been shattered, replaced by a renewed sense of danger, a reminder that the fight for their future was far from over. The shadows were closing in, and they had to be ready to face them, together. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons. The discovery of the intruders sent a ripple of unease through their hard-won peace. Rhett, ever vigilant, doubled their security measures, setting traps, keeping watch, his senses on high alert. Josie, though fearful, stood by his side, her determination unwavering, her love for him a constant source of strength. They spent their days preparing, honing their skills, practicing their shooting, anticipating the inevitable confrontation. They knew they couldn't run, they couldn't hide. They had to face their enemies, whoever they were, and protect their home, their love, their future. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, they heard a sound, the faint but unmistakable sound of approaching horses. This time, there was no attempt at stealth, no pretense of secrecy. Their enemies were coming, and they were coming openly. Rhett grabbed his rifle, his face grim, his body tense. "It's them," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Get ready." Josie nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed her own rifle, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve firm. She would stand by Rhett. She would fight for their love. She would defend their home. They took their positions, Rhett at the front window, Josie at the back, their eyes scanning the approaches to the cabin, their fingers on the triggers, their bodies coiled and ready. The riders appeared, a small group of men, their faces hard and menacing, their weapons drawn. Leading them was a figure Rhett recognized, a man he had hoped never to see again. It wasn't Thorn. It was Thorn's son, Elias. A younger, perhaps even more ruthless version of his father. "Callahan," Elias shouted, his voice echoing through the valley. "We know you're in there. Come out and face us. It's time to pay for what you did to my father." Rhett stepped out onto the porch, his rifle leveled, his eyes cold and hard. Your father brought this on himself. Elias, he said. He was a criminal, a murderer. He got what he deserved. Elias laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. You think you can hide behind the law? He sneered. You think those marshals will protect you? You're wrong, Callahan. This is personal. This is family. Your family has caused enough pain, Elias, Rhett said. It's time to end this. Leave us alone. Never, Elias replied, his voice filled with hatred. I won't rest until you're dead, until I've avenged my father. He raised his hand, signaling his men to attack. A volley of shots rang out, the bullets slamming into the cabin walls, shattering windows, splintering wood. Rhett returned fire, his shots accurate and deadly. Josie, too, fired her rifle, her aim surprisingly steady, her determination unwavering. The battle raged, a fierce and desperate struggle for survival. Rhett and Josie fought with courage and skill, defending their home, their love, their future. One by one, Elias's men fell, their bodies littering the ground around the cabin. But Elias remained, driven by a blind rage, a thirst for revenge. He charged towards the cabin, firing his pistol, his eyes fixed on Rhett. Rhett met his charge, the two men grappling, their bodies locked in a desperate struggle. Josie watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. She raised her rifle, her finger on the trigger, but she hesitated, afraid of hitting Rhett. Suddenly, a shot rang out, not from Rhett or Elias, but from somewhere else. Elias staggered, his eyes widening in surprise, a look of disbelief on his face. He crumpled to the ground, dead. Josie and Rhett looked up, their eyes searching for the source of the shot. Standing on a nearby ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun, was a figure they recognized. Silas Hollis. He lowered his rifle, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. He had finally chosen the right side. He had finally redeemed himself. The final confrontation had come, and it had ended not with a victory for hatred and revenge, but with an act of loyalty, of sacrifice, of redemption. The shadows of the past had finally been dispelled, replaced by the promise of a new dawn, a new beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Rhett and Josie stood together, their arms wrapped around each other, their hearts filled with a mixture of grief and gratitude. They had survived, they had triumphed, but they had also learned a valuable lesson. The true strength, the true victory, lay not in violence or revenge, but in love, in forgiveness, in the enduring power of the human spirit. The horizon stretched before them, vast and unknown, but they were ready to face them, together, their hearts intertwined, their love a beacon that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Epilogue. The years that followed were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to the power of love to heal and to transform. Rhett and Josie rebuilt the cabin in the hidden valley, making it not just a home, but a sanctuary, a place where they could live in peace, surrounded by the beauty of the natural world. They worked the land, raising cattle, tending to their garden, living a simple but fulfilling life. They were no longer defined by the shadows of their past, by the violence and the betrayal that had once threatened to consume them. They were defined by their love, by their commitment to each other, by their shared dream of a future free from fear and hatred. Silas Hollis, a changed man, became a frequent visitor to the valley, his relationship with Josie slowly mending, the bonds of family reforged in the fires of adversity. He had found redemption in his final act, and he spent his remaining years trying to make amends for his past mistakes. Benjamin Carter, surprisingly, also became a friend. He had been freed from a life he hadn't truly wanted, and he had found a new path, a new purpose, in a different part of the territory. He occasionally visited, the awkwardness of their past replaced by a genuine respect and a shared understanding. Esme Lancaster remained a constant presence in their lives, a source of wisdom, of strength, of unwavering support. She was the matriarch of their extended family, the one who had brought them together, the one who had helped them navigate the darkest of times. Rhett and Josie never forgot Sarah. They honored her memory by living a life of honesty, of integrity, of compassion. They created a small memorial for her in the valley, a quiet place where they could go to reflect, to remember, to find peace. The hidden valley, once a place of refuge from danger, became a symbol of hope, of healing, of new beginnings. It was a place where love had triumphed over adversity, where forgiveness had replaced revenge, where the wounds of the past had finally begun to heal. As the years passed, Rhett and Josie grew old together, their love deepening, their bond strengthening. They had faced many challenges, they had overcome many obstacles, but they had never lost sight of what was truly important, each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Rhett reached out and took Josie's hand, his touch gentle and familiar. "We made it, Josie," he said, his voice soft, his eyes filled with a love that had endured the test of time. Josie smiled, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "Yes, we did, Rhett," she said. "We made it. Together." And as the stars emerged in the vast, inky sky, they sat there, two souls intertwined, their love a beacon that shone brightly in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a testament to the promise of a future filled with hope, with peace, with the unwavering certainty that they had found their place, their home, their forever, in each other's arms. The echoes of the past had faded, replaced by the gentle whisper of the wind, the soft murmur of the stream, and the quiet, enduring rhythm of two hearts beating as one.